There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a review of the Canadian novel We Jane by Aimee Wall. Just came out earlier in 2021 from the fabulous publishers Book Hug Press, and I love this book. It was a 5-star read for me, despite it not being a perfect novel, but it's an incredibly impressive debut, and it was such a Shawn book, so I just have to tell you all about it. It is an abortion novel. That is the theme. It is set in both Montreal and Newfoundland, but the main action of the story happens in a rinky-dink little Newfoundland. Like, we're not talking St. John's, Newfoundland, which is the capital city, but just in this small little town. And there are a group of women who have been quietly under the radar, generation by generation, providing abortion services as well as midwife services to local women. And the story is based on the true story of the Jane movement, which I believe started in Chicago and operated, maybe it still operates, I don't pretend to know much about it, but you can certainly Google it, of women that knew how to do safe abortion and would especially in places in the States where abortion was illegal or hard to get, they would just do it without any doctors or nurses being present, but with the same kind of skills that a typical midwife would have. I don't know any more of the details about that, but fascinating. Yet this story is set in contemporary Canada. Abortion has been completely legal. We have some of the most unrestrictive abortion laws in the world, I believe, since a Supreme Court decision in 1988. So the story about women wanting to keep this tradition and this matrilineal, matriarchal knowledge alive and passed on adds intellectual. You can't help but be intellectually curious about, well, abortion is perfectly legal and easy, not difficult to get in Canada. Why does this tradition continue? And that is one of the questions that you will have as you read the novel. But even more than that, what I loved about this novel was, I was going to say, was the characters, but in fact the two main characters I didn't really like. I was absolutely gobsmackingly fascinated by them. The third person, I guess, omniscient point of view is mostly focused on and really only enters the consciousness of the main character, Martha. It's spelled with an E, but definitely pronounced like the word Martha. And she is in her early 30s and lives in Montreal, a Newfoundlander living in Montreal and not really satisfied with her life. She has a somewhat recently failed relationship. She's single. She is not working a job that she loves and is just kind of adrift. And she is one of the most she is one of the most perceptive characters that I have encountered in literature. Certainly in a long, long time. I can't remember being struck by a literary character's perceptivity as in this book. She reads a room, she reads the air. That's the Japanese expression, KY, which means, I forget what the Japanese is, but read the air. She is just extremely good at picking up on people's emotional states and interpersonal dynamics everywhere she is. So the story being told through her perspective made it so much more fascinating for me, because otherwise I don't know, I'm not interested in reading novels that are social political unless there are really well-rounded characters to carry the story along. And boy, was this a success on that front. So there's all this stuff about the knowledge of how to do abortions and keeping that knowledge passed on the lowdown so that it will always be available. You never know what's, the Canadian political scene is pretty progressive, but we do have anti-abortion movements. It's not like in the States where Roe v. Wade is on the way out the door, apparently. So this is a very timely novel and might be read in a different way by Americans. But as a Canadian, I read it more from this perspective of why does this knowledge need to be carried on, and why would this kind of under-the-radar abortion service be necessary in today's Canada? So those bigger questions, and then this intensity of interpersonal relationships between the characters. So Martha is the young one, and in Montreal, she's kind of looking for a purpose, for a cause, and so she goes to some, I think it was, I've actually forgotten, I think it was a midwife. No spoilers here, so I'm only going to set up the premise and not going to give you any spoilers, and this is not a spoiler, I don't think, that she meets Ruth at some midwife training course or something along those lines, and they both are repulsed by the kind of new agey facilitator for this introductory workshop, and they leave at the first coffee break and go for coffee and talk for hours. And I instantly disliked Ruth, and I did this as a buddy read with Britta, and Britta didn't have near the negative reaction to Ruth that I did, but I never trusted her. She was very sullen, she would pout, she was uncommunicative, and they fit together perfectly because Martha didn't have the assertiveness to ask what she needed to know. So Ruth is hinting that there's this thing going on back in Newfoundland and they should go take part, and it's a women's collective that's ultimately, she does disclose that it's about this kind of Jane collective happening in rural Newfoundland, and so they take a road trip and they go back. So the leader, the kind of reluctant, very humble, very down-to-earth, everybody's farmer grandmother, Trish, is at the center of this. She is the matriarch of the group, and she has no use for politics. She is just a midwife and has been for generations. I believe her mother was before her, and she does abortions when necessary and is looking to pass the knowledge on. So she and Ruth have a history that is, Ruth being so uncommunicative. Martha has no idea what's ever gone on between Ruth and Trish. Trish is lesbian. Apparently Ruth is so Jesus, I couldn't stand her, and she was fascinating. Like, it was such a success story for me how much I disliked Ruth, and other readers don't seem to dislike her the way I did, but that it didn't get in the way of me enjoying the novel. There's Martha. She's reading this bad energy between these two women and then these two women, and she's trying to piece it all together, but she doesn't have the interpersonal skills. She has the intrapersonal skills to pick up on everything, but she doesn't assert herself, in any political group, and I have done quite a bit of political activist work in my day. Thank God those days are past, because I really hated it because of the personalities. The cause, yes, it's important causes, but I can't stand the kind of people that do political activism. They drive me up the wall, and they are all in this book. And it's much better because it's all women. There's no men. What a refreshingly woman-centered novel this is. A lot of the characters are heterosexual, so it's not like there isn't sexual, it's an abortion. It's about abortion, so you need and there is not a man-hating kind of tone to the thing, but it's also just lovely to read a bunch of fascinating women and not have to worry about the stupid man. So I love this novel so much. For me as a reader, it was focused on my sweet spot, which I care about social political issues, I care about abortion rights, but I would not get along with a novel that treated that at the expense of character building and a good story. And the sweet spot is that the characters, especially Martha, she's so perceptive and a little bit wussy about kind of asserting herself. So the story is carried and makes you think about all these larger questions, but attached to the way the characters are bumping up against one another, bouncing off one another, and coming together for common cause. It is incredible. It's a debut novel. Aimee Wall has done a bunch of translation. Mostly Quebec writers of French. She's translated into English. I want to read all her translations. I'm going to put a link to her reading the opening few pages of the book so you can hear her reading it in her own voice. Like I said, this is not a perfect novel. There was a repetitiveness to the anecdotes about Martha's past, because she did have kind of a humdrum, kind of following her nose and not really ever asserting herself, and things kept happening to her, and there was a repetitiveness of those stories. It was a 5-star read for me, so it didn't bug me very much, obviously. You must try this book. I loved it. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.